some people might see a quiz that I do here and think like, oh, he knows all these things. I don't know all of these things. So the reason I made it, I was at the ACCU conference in 2013, I think it was. And then Olve Maudal was doing a pub quiz. And we did that and had some beers and I got into my room like quite late. And then I figured someone should make a website about this stuff.
To the time we've all been waiting on, to see how well Anders does in quizzes himself. Can you zoom into the forehead? He's starting to sweat now.
Yeah.
Welcome to The Curious Developer. I'm Jesper Pedersen from KDAB and I'm here at NDC Techtown in beautiful Norway, where I have a guest, special guest with me now, namely one of the people in the program committee, Anders C++ Quiz Knatten. And the C++ quiz is because he actually did a quiz last night. I almost won. Only had like 8 out of 10 questions wrong, so pretty good there. And he also have written a book on C++ Brain Teaser. I'll talk a bit with him about that. I'll talk a bit about him, about the conference. And of course, I will quiz him in the end. Time for revenge. Anders, good to see you here, and thank you for the great work you've done at this conference. So, how is the conference doing this year?
I think it's. I think I heard it's the largest conference so far of NDC Techtown. We've been going for a few years.
Yeah.
So I've been in the agenda committee for like 4 or 5 years, something like that. And yeah, I think it's going really well. Yeah, lots of good talks and. Yeah, people seem to be happy, so yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of good talks indeed.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been sitting here interviewing people. That's a pity because there's a lot of talks that I missed out on, but I guess they will be eventually online as the previous years.
Yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of good stuff to look out for there. You are known for doing presentations here, and let me just look at my notes here because I cannot remember those, but you have been doing last year, if I don't remember right, you did the two memory models, talking about, well, the assembler model and the down on the chip model. You have talked about understanding assembler, about symbol linking, or symbols and the linking phase to symbols, and this time real-time safety, which I unfortunately did not see either. So, well, I'll have to watch that when it comes up on YouTube. But I'm curious. That is a broad range of relatively low-level stuff.
Yeah.
What motivated you in digging into those? And is the presentation at the end part of the process?
So my first, like, actually good conference talk was just enough assembly for...
First good one.
Yeah.
So, can we find those on YouTube, those that weren't good?
Yeah. And like everyone has to start out somewhere, right? So
Yeah.
so the first I think is actually really good is the just enough assembly for Compiler Explorer.
Yeah.
And that one was also the one that was absolutely the most work. And it was just because I was trying to use Compiler Explorer and I didn't understand the stuff on the right. Like, what's this assembly stuff? So I had some assembly in college many years ago, but I don't remember anything. Yeah. So I wanted to learn it, and I went to look for like a conference talk or something, and there wasn't anything. So I learned it, and then I figured I'll make a talk because that talk is missing. So that was that one. And the other ones you mentioned about linking and symbols and stuff, that's just been problems at work that someone has to look into.
Okay.
And I mostly worked in kind of small teams, so often there's like lots of stuff going on that no one really knows anything about, and like we have an issue, and I like to volunteer to like dig into that. So we had some big issues with how we were linking things that turned into like really interesting problems, and then I had to figure out what we were doing wrong, how does this actually work, and how should we be doing it, and then I gave a talk internally after figuring it out, and then I figured I can, with some extra work, it can turn into a conference talk, and then that's how it usually goes, that I have to like debug something, or and then I need to learn it, and then yeah, turn it into a talk at the end. So
So just for our viewers, I translate what he just said. He doesn't want to do his real work, so he just volunteer himself to do something that is slightly unrelated, so he can go to Kongsberg for a few days and party.
Yeah, that's a good summary.
Yeah.
But yeah, I enjoy these like spending quite a lot of time figuring something out kind of things. So yeah, they often lend themselves to being a conference talk at the end. So.
And of course, whatever is interesting to people depend on what they are interested in, and say the symbols and library thing. For me, I was like, I'll delegate that to one of my coworkers. But especially the one, and here's a recommendation from me, the one about the assembler or enough assembler for Compiler Explorer. That was a pretty interesting one. And just like you, possibly 10 years further back, I also had it at a university learning about assembler. So, yeah. But that brings me to the question of why do you think that it's important for people to understand what's going on a simpler level? I mean, I can sit there and say, okay, so I have a loop, and if I say -03, then now it's my assembler did all the work, or my compiler did all the work, and it just says 42 there. But at a larger scale, who and why do you think it's important?
Mostly you don't need to understand the assembly, I think. Like if you're doing something that's performance critical, maybe it's actually interesting, and like knowing your hardware and stuff like that. And like a former colleague of mine, he was very good at just writing C and C++ in a way that was optimal for the compiler, so it could like generate fast code. And then you need to know this stuff. But most people don't need to. And when I use Compiler Explorer, I usually just do it to like check something. And I'm not there to like read all the assembly. I'm like
200,000 lines later.
Yeah, but Klaus, I think, had in his talk yesterday an example of like he's saying you should use strong types. So and then people say, oh no, but it's too slow. If you like, instead of passing an int, you pass a class that's a seconds class or something, and then you add to it and you overload the plus operator. It's going to take forever. But you just like paste it on Compiler Explorer and you see it's the exact same instructions, and then like the argument is settled. You don't need benchmarking and stuff. So, and then you don't really need to understand the assembly. You just like see it's the same one. Yeah. But if you can like recognize, oh, that's a function call, and then you see that, okay, so if I do it like this, it calls the function, but if I do it like this, it doesn't call the function. Or so that's the idea with the talk as well, just enough that you understand like the basics of that. And I think that Matt Godbolt, he said that's the reason he made, or the first experiment that turned into Compiler Explorer was just, he said you should use range-based for loops, not raw loops. Yeah. And then someone said, but maybe that's slower. And then instead of then like making a benchmark and everything, just like, okay, let's look at the assembly code, and well, it's exactly the same. So then you don't need to benchmark it. I was 2 days ago, I was in your colleague's workshop about profiling and debugging on Linux. Yeah. And so we changed mutex to a std atomic, and then like, okay, that's faster. And then I was thinking, maybe if we change it to a relaxed atomic, like we changed the memory order for it, like would it be faster? And I could just like type it into Compiler Explorer and see it like on x86, because of the memory model, like it's exactly the same. It doesn't make a difference. But then you see, well, on ARM, it's actually different instructions. So it doesn't really require you to know everything. It's just like you can understand a little bit. I think that's enough for most people.
And that is indeed the cool thing about Compiler Explorer, that you actually can get an idea of how is it different on different architectures, assuming that you're targeting multiple architectures in the first place. So, yeah. In your book, there's one here, chapter 23, which you obviously remember very well.
Yeah.
You talk about the arguments for functions and what order they are invoked in. And spoiler alert, so there's no order. No, well, I'm sure there is an order, but there's no guaranteed order.
Yeah.
And that made me, when I let me just admit, I didn't read the whole book, but I have the book, right? That's half of the step to reading a book.
Yeah.
So in that book, when I read that chapter, I was sitting there asking myself, when did I ever have a problem where I would even, or when did I ever have a situation where I would get into that problem? I mean, I had a conversation with one of my coworkers yesterday, and it's like, but if you have I++ and ++I and function and parameters, like, but when do you do that? I mean, you don't do that. So
you don't do that.
I'm really wondering, with everything out there, I mean, you mentioned Klaus Edelberger yourself, who's this high-level guy trying to design our application and whatnot, and well, Jason Turner has 500 episodes on his C++ Weekly, and if you're into Qt, there's 150 episodes of Qt widgets and more in there. So there's lots and lots of love to learn.
Yeah.
Why is it important, or is it important to learn these kind of things?
Not necessarily like that thing in isolation. So that's maybe one of, if you just look at the exact code, that's one of the like least relevant questions, I would say, in the book. It does come from an actual code base I was working on, where we did have like an implementation defined or unspecified order of reading the configuration and setting up the logger, and they were kind of dependent on each other. Okay. So we didn't have any actual bugs with this, but that's where I got the idea from.
Right.
But the important point of that chapter is just to get across the point that there is things like implementation defined behavior, unspecified behavior. Yeah. So just the fact that you run your program and you see something happening doesn't mean that that's actually the correct thing that it will always do. And you port to a different architecture and something is different. So it's just an example of something that can change. Yeah.
Okay. So it's just like a self-advertisement here. I wrote a book on Emacs. Okay, 25 years ago, you can't even buy it anymore, but it said Emacs in 24 hours, so it had to have 24 chapters.
Yeah.
Some of these were slightly sought after, so I could get 24 chapters. And I guess your publisher said, well, it needs to have at least, how many was that? So,
yeah, 25.
Yeah, and then you said, okay, so the order of parameter. No, I'm just kidding.
No, yeah, but like, I think it's a relevant question, and the thing is like, many of these questions are inspired by my website, which is full of like weird stuff. But I try to find something that will teach you the concepts that I want to get across. So that like you have to know about undefined behavior and implementation defined behavior, and just don't trust just running your program and seeing what happens. Kind of like getting that idea across. That was one of the points I think with the book.
And for those of you that have never been to one of Anders' C++ quiz at a conference, they're a lot of fun. I got there's one that I'm actually proud of that I got right. The one with what's called template with variety template. That's
the expansion thing.
Yeah. I got that one right.
I would probably have gotten it wrong if I didn't write the question. So,
I got that one right. I felt like, hey, I'm not a dinosaur yet. But then you got me on the one with the unsigned integer that you counted down to 0. It's like, I should have seen that coming. So, but besides being a lot of fun, and if you have not tried cppquiz.org yet, you should totally go and do that. Friday afternoon is a good time if you're, I can't do any more. When your boss come around, like, I'm actually learning skills about C++, and it is a lot of fun.
Yeah. And it's all completely super relevant, all of the questions.
Every single one of them. Yeah. But did you have a more, I'm searching for word here, profound sounds wrong, but a deeper meaning with this besides just entertaining people, which it does?
So the reason I made it, I was at the ACCU conference in 2013, I think it was. And then Olve Maudal was doing a pub quiz. And we did that, and had some beers, and I got into my room like quite late, and then I figured someone should make a website about this stuff.
Yeah.
And then I started like coding it at night after quite a few beers, and then I kind of finished it on the train and the plane back home. And if you look at the implementation of that, so you can see that that's how it was created. So it was like just someone has to do this. I'll make a site, and then it's just kind of continued. But it's mostly just for C++ nerds just having fun. Sometimes I hear from people that they, like every Friday at work, we do a random quiz question or something. And I think that's nice because then you get together and you talk about something, and maybe it's just some silly quiz question, but then maybe you start being more curious about how does this actually work, and like what's this thing in the language, and yeah.
And I mean, I've been asking this question to multiple people at this conference here about when is enough enough, and I think that's one of the key things. I mean, walk around here and go up to a random person and say, so do you know all of C++? People are like, no. I mean, there's always some minor thing that you can learn, and sometimes it requires picking up a thick book and giving it your full brain power and learning how to do this the right way, and how is it different these days in more modern C++ than I was used to. But sometimes it's just useful also just to at least open your world to where do I not understand something by a fun quiz.
Yeah, and I think like the going around talking to people and discovering there's so much you don't know, that happens to all of those people you go to as well, right? Yeah. So you go to some expert and they're an expert in this thing, and then you go to another person and they are an expert in that thing, and when you're just like a normal person like me, you go around and you kind of feel like everyone knows all these things, but they don't. Like all the speakers, they've spent a week or two making that talk and like really reading up on it, and that's they know that thing, and then the speaker in the next room, they know something else, and no one knows everything. So I think that's important to know, especially if you're a bit newer. Like you see all of this and think, do I have to be that good in everything? And you don't. Yeah.
And then you convert it into a book. Besides, it's looking good on the nightstand or wherever you lay your books. What was the idea of going from a website to a book?
It wasn't my idea, in fact. So the pragmatic programmers, they have this series of Brain Teasers books. So they had like Python and Go and Rust, and then they wanted a C++ one. And then just randomly, like a common acquaintance figured, wait, maybe you could ask this Anders guy, he has this quiz, maybe. And I then had an idea for a different book that I actually wanted to write. And then I figured, well, maybe I'll start writing a kind of simpler book like this, and I get into how to do that, and I get some connections maybe. So it was basically, they were looking for someone to do it, and it was convenient for me to do it. So that's why.
And now I'm of course curious. The other book being?
Another book about how stuff works on computers.
Okay. So you heard it here first, right?
Yeah, probably actually.
So now we'll hold you up to it. So throughout my career, I have been polishing my tools or learning new tools quite a bit, because I think that the most important thing for a developer is to be super proficient with his tools. And I assume, given your abilities and stuff, that you are in violent agreement with me there. And that would, of course, make me curious. What is the top 200 or a little bit less of the tools that you find useful?
Yeah, so like my absolute most important favorite tool is just like my legs. Just go for a walk. That's my like so useful. So if you're debugging something, like just gather kind of enough information and like lock your computer, go away. Or if you're designing something, or you're like trying to figure out how to solve something, go for a 5-minute walk or a 1-hour walk or something. That's my absolute favorite tool. That's one. And the second one is like kind of trivial. Just use an IDE that like does things that are useful. And I would kind of assume that everyone does that, but a lot of people don't, right? So what's an IDE? That I leave that up to like the people who use it, but like you should have code completion, go to definition, right-click something and find all the things that call this thing. A great debugger where you can set breakpoints and conditional breakpoints, dependent breakpoints, and where you can easily see the history of a file, like browse the Git history, annotate how did this line come into existence. It sounds trivial, but a lot of people don't have that. And like you can. I'm a big fan of Vim, so we can have a war about editors, I guess, but you get great Vim plugins for IDEs, or you can probably set it up with lots of plugins and stuff. But no matter how you set it up, you need to have these tools in order to have a more enjoyable time working.
And it's funny because part of my job is I'm also the HR director, so I hire people, and I'm stunned every time somebody comes in and I tell them we're going to have a coding exercise here. They come in, and bring your it's over the internet, right?
Yeah.
So we'll just unassume start your favorite IDE, and here's the software, and then they start VI or similar, and they go out and they run make, and they see error online. They go in and they look at it. It's like, oh, what was it? To go out again, and like, can you at least bring up two shells next to each other? I mean, that's just a game over.
Yeah, I think that's very important. And like I've seen people be productive in Vim as well, like with the right plugins, and you get like lots of cool stuff. But so that works as long as you do that. And then like with VS Code, so I've seen people just use it as an editor. Right. But then if you put enough plugins in, it eventually turns into almost an IDE, right? So you can kind of use it like that. Personally, I like CLion. It like just works. Yeah. And VS Code kind of feels like 3 plugins in a trench coat, kind of. But I'm sure you can set it up properly. But like whatever you use, just set it up so you can get these things working, because it's going to be very useful. And maybe even you can get a little bit of refactoring help and stuff as well. So I know we can do like %s in Vim, and like right-click, change name, and everything changes. And
to the time we've all been waiting on, to see how well Anders does in quizzes himself. So I have these 8 questions from Eurovision Song Contest. No worries. So first of all, there needs to be a prize, right? And it doesn't, when there's only one competitor, it's not really that there's no one else that can come close. So it's going to be both ways, right? So if you actually answer these 3 questions, I will, and mind you, we are in Norway, right? For those that doesn't know, just Google the price of a beer in Norway. I will, if you get them all 3 right, I will give you a beer coaster with my face on it. I couldn't buy a beer for crying out.
I'm not sure if that's even legal in Norway to buy someone a beer like this.
And if you fail, then you'll fix all my compile errors in the next year. Yeah. That seems like fair trade-off, right? Yeah, good. Okay, so we'll start out with actually your book. That should be an easy one. It's even on the back here. So it says, or is it on Amazon? Somewhere it says that you can write the following expression. It'll be hovering above my head for everybody else to see here. And I would like you in 15 seconds to tell me, what does it mean? Yeah. Are you ready? Yeah. So the expression is plus, exclamation mark, quote, quote, starting now.
Yeah, so that's a string literal. So that's an array of const car. You can implicitly convert it to a car pointer, and then you can negate it a couple of times and use the unary plus. That doesn't do anything to it. That
was pretty close. I'm sure we can put in a stopwatch sitting here saying tick, 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 that will run so fast that you almost made it. That's okay. Okay, so over my head, there is now another piece of code. And I would like you to look at this code and tell me, what is the output of this program?
No idea.
No idea?
Yeah.
It's even from C++ quiz.
Yeah, I know. And that's actually an important point, that some people might see a quiz that I do here and think like, oh, he knows all of these things. I don't know all of these things. I prepare another the website. I also don't know all the answers, because people submit questions, and then I thought I would save time, because I'll allow people to just submit questions and I don't have to write all the questions. But then they submit really weird stuff that I don't know. And now I have to spend like 4 hours reading the standard, making sure the explanation is correct and that everything is fine. So I don't save time at all. But then there's lots of weird stuff like this. So like then you have to know how does this parse and everything. So I think this question it's not a very good question. Like no one needs to know this stuff. But for the language nerds, it can be fun, right? So I
can tell you, and that's the part about C++ quiz that drives me nuts every time I'm sitting there. Like, no, this must be one of those where it doesn't compile. So this one doesn't compile.
It doesn't?
No, it doesn't compile, because the up here I will paste in what it says there. It's something with the it's trying to get as much as it can. and then you would have thought that it's A++ and plus B, and then a unary or a binary plus.
Yeah, you could like imagine parsing it in different ways. Yeah.
But the parser tries to read as much as it can, and then so it doesn't.
Compiling C++ must be very, very hard. Yeah, so on the website, I think that's important as well. Some of the questions I don't think are very interesting. So when I wrote the book, I've like made sure to do relevant, interesting stuff that teaches you something useful. That one doesn't really teach you anything. But some people think that this is fun still. So there's kind of a mix. So I'm trying to think of if I can like put a filter on the site that like filters out some of the more esoteric stuff or something. That might probably be a good idea. So if you want to try, it was 178 is the number of the question. Yeah.
He just needed to check so he can go back and yeah. There'll be a link either hovering here or down underneath telling you, so you can go and try it out. And especially that's the thing that I like about the website too, that there is this description about what is this all about.
Yeah, so that's very important for me, that like when you either get it correct or not, you get like the proper explanation with references to the standard saying this is exactly what's going on, so that we were sure that it's actually correct, and that you can look up like the actual things behind it.
So far it's been 0 out of 2. So you have a chance of.
I didn't get the first one right.
Did you get the first one right? Okay.
I think I did so.
So 1 out of 2. So it can be 2 out of 3 if you can get this one here. So, and I wrote it here by hand because I needed to just check with a few people. So the question is, what is the most wrong? I don't know if is that the wrongest. You're the language lawyer here among the two of us. The wrongest in this statement. The most optimal way to instantiate member variables is to use member initialization lists unless the members are const, in which case they must be initialized in the body of the constructor. You want the question again?
Nothing must be initialized in the constructor body ever, right? Unless you have to wait on something to happen first.
And that's your final answer?
Well, the well, if you put it, you have to put it in the member initializer, either in the what's the name of the member you put next to the member, or the member initializer list before the body.
Please zoom into the forehead. He's starting to sweat now. Yeah. It's exactly how he's trying to put us all in trouble there yesterday evening, having a good time with a bit of alcohol or whatever beverages we had, and then he asked really weird questions. I'll give you the answer.
Yeah.
The answer is that the wrongest in this statement is that the most optimal. There is no such thing as most optimal. Optimal is already the most.
That's a good one. But about the quiz, when you're trying to like make me think hard here. One of my favorite things about the quiz is when I've like really researched a question, and then someone in the audience goes like, "No, you're actually including the wrong header." So abs in that one is like the other, like that's for the floating point abs and not for the like. It's like there's always someone who knows some weird thing even a little bit better.
And I was actually thinking about that yesterday evening. It's like, gee, you have put yourself in an extremely tough spot up there, because you have all these people that are super smart and knows all the tiny little detail.
Yeah.
They will be language lawyering you out of the room if they can.
Yeah. And some tried but failed, but they got it right with the right header for abs. Caught me. But I enjoy that. So.
Anders, it was a pleasure talking to you.
Same.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for inviting me.